Good afternoon. Wow, we have quite a turnout. It's nice to see you all this afternoon. See a lot of familiar faces and some new faces, so thanks for being here. I'm Sherry Reed. I'm the Executive Director of the California Education Lab. We're a research center at UC Davis focused on the transition between high school and post-secondary education. And I'm pleased to moderate this panel today, leveraging state investments for high school transformation. At lunch, Dr. Howard asked us to consider the question, what is our strategy for moving forward? And I think that this panel will have some answers, probably not all the answers, but some answers on what our strategy could be and should be for moving forward, especially in the arena of high school and the transition to post-secondary. So I'm pleased to introduce our panelists. We have Michal Kurlaender, Chancellor's Leadership Professor in the School of Education at UC Davis, and Faculty Director of the California Education Lab where I work, so my boss. Also Faculty Co-Director of PACE. We have Alexandria Hurtt, Research Fellow at the California Education Lab, who is going to provide us a lot of data points today to consider on where students are currently at in high school outcomes. We have LeNoir from, he's Assistant Superintendent in Verde Unified School District in Riverside County, who is going to tell us about some great things that they're doing down there to ensure equitable outcomes for their students. And then we have Roneeta, Guha, Principal Consultant at Education First, who's going to talk about bringing coherence to all of the state's investments and high school programming for students. So without further ado, Michal.
Thank you, Sherry, and thanks everyone for joining us in the afternoon. Again, I'm Michal Kurlaender, and I'm at UC Davis and PACE, and happy to be here. And just, I could have put many examples here. I just want to reiterate what we've already heard both this morning and this afternoon from Dr. Howard, but, post sort of nearly 33 years, not 33 years, around post-pandemic, we've learned a lot around sort of challenges that students have experienced, both academic learning, engagement, social, emotional, and so today we're really going to talk about sort of how we've responded as a state and as a nation, and there's, I could have put a lot of national responses to this too, the National Academy for Education, but many have effectively called for a reset. What can we learn in terms of a reset for education systems? And what does transformation look like? And today we're going to tackle it from kind of the secondary to post-secondary space. But we know it needs to be more student-centered, it needs to be more inclusive of families and communities, whole child-centered, and specifically, explicitly focused on equity. So today we're going to show, most of my time I'm going to actually give to Alex Hurtt, who's my colleague at the Ed Lab, to show the data we've been working with. But before I do that, I just want to sort of say our lab was born out of a kind of a partnership with the California Department of Education. Jonathan, Kimberly here, I don't know who else is here. I just want to thank them in the absence of a longitudinal data system, not for long. Thank you, Cradle to Career. We were really lost. So we really built a partnership to really with the explicit goal of understanding students' transitions into post-secondary spaces, both colleges, but also the labor market. Much harder to do, actually. And so as part of that, we added on sort of data from the Student Aid Commission, from UCs, from CSUs, and most importantly with the community college system, which is, as you know, the majority of our students go to. So I want to thank those data agency, the segments, and for being great partners in this work. And just a quick thanks, because I see them, some of them in the room, our funders, College Futures, Stewart and Gates, for all of this. So I just wanted to thank them for really what's been over a decade-long project to understand California students' pathways through school. So today, we're going to talk about a variety of things, but I just wanted to kind of put this up. Actually, Roneeta's going to have much better slides that show this. I'm going to show the incoherence, and she's going to show the coherence. But I'm going to talk about some of the big investments and what it looks like. And so again, we've already heard community schools mentioned multiple times. We've also heard a lot about K-16 regional partnerships. Our own campus, UC Davis, is involved in 3 of these, right? So we see a lot of effort to try to for integration across the systems. Right across the hall there, we're talking about early education, because we know that the biggest predictor of students' kind of longer-term outcomes is how they fared earlier, right? And so both inequalities exacerbate, but also kind of access to resources, et cetera. So we know we need investments in early childhood lots and lots of really rich research on this and the importance of early childhood and early education, along with increasingly more efforts to address kind of counseling, mental health, student engagement that is much beyond academic learning. A lot of our project is spent on academic preparation. I just want to say I forget who said it in the morning panel, but just, the academic preparation is just one piece of this. And sometimes we fixate on it because it's where the data are. Like we see a lot, we see test scores, we see grades, and it's actually just one part of the child. And so I shout out to CORE and other places that have tried to actually measure the other key components of children's lives. There isn't a standardized way to do that across the schools. We know we measure culture and climate at schools, often not tied to students' academic performance. And so today you're going to see a lot on A to G course completion, on math, on dual enrollment, on academic preparation. Increasingly, we'll see other types of engagement for students, ethnic studies. This is a great room. There's Emily Penner does work on ethnic studies. And then finally, we're not going to say much about this, but look out for our stuff. We do spend a lot of time thinking about other barriers to college enrollment, including financial aid and access to college. And so the state has also made huge efforts to improve financial aid, both in terms of who's entitled to Cal Grants, but also to reducing national efforts to reduce the complexity of FAFSA and CADA completion, and requiring all high school seniors to submit a FAFSA or CADA. So I'm not going to talk as much about that today, though Alex and I are happy to entertain questions about it. And we'll say some about career education. So without further ado, we're going to tag team, but Alex is going to actually share some of our data from the last several years. And most of these, though not all, are available through PACE or through academic. If you want the 30-page with lots of footnotes academic versions of these papers, happy to reference you those. And then we're going to highlight a little bit of forthcoming work as well that's not quite out yet. So come take it away.
I'm going to try. I have my notes over here, so thanks for your patience. So thank you all again for coming. My name is Alexandria Hurtt. As Michal and Sherry said, I'm at the California Education Lab, and I'm going to be presenting some work from our lab that's the result of multiple authors. I'm just going to be the face of it today. And so with our partnerships, we're able to look at a wide variety of data to better understand students' pathways in high school. And so I'm going to share a few highlights from some of our recent reports that are up here, talking about A to G, dual enrollment, as Michal just mentioned. And so these results include different samples of recent cohorts of students. So as we go through, I'll just make note of the different data sets we're pulling from in the years, because they're going to be a little bit different. So here we're going to look at A to G. This is from a really recent cohort, 2022. We're drawing on data from the CCI, and we're seeing that a little less than about half, 46% of students are graduating A to G complete, so they're taking all of the A to G courses that you need for the sequence. But we also see that there's a big difference between which students are getting that completion. So for example, we're finding that Black students are about half as likely as Filipino students or Asian students to complete these A to G courses. And we have a little bit more in our recent report that looks at A to G about how this also differs by socioeconomic disadvantage or English learner status. When we zoom out a little bit and we look at this at the school level, we're also seeing that A to G completion really varies between school to school. So this far bar on the far left, that's representing one school that very few students are graduating A to G complete, versus at the far right, this school, for example, pretty much every student is graduating, completing all the A to G courses. And this yellow bar in the middle is just representative of all California public schools. So we are seeing a variety from school to school. This is really then a schools matter issue. Students' ability to access A to G courses really just depends on the school they're in. So that's one thing to take into account. And I will also mention that this variation we see does exist for all of the academic preparation courses I'm going to be talking about today, but don't have time to really show it, but just keep in mind that the school that a student's in really matters for the courses they can take. Just to talk a little bit more about one specific course, math is a really big thing for students, including the fourth year that students take math. Excuse me. So this is looking at 12th graders from the 2018-2019 cohort, drawing on CalPADS data. And in this far left circle, we're seeing kind of an overview of the students that are taking math in their senior year. The red portion is a senior that didn't take any math course in that last year of high school. So that's 25% of all students in 2018-2019 didn't take math. One of the other things we're really interested in, though, is which students are taking an advanced course. So an advanced math course, as we're defining it, is a course that's above Algebra 2. So in this figure on the right, I'm not sure how clear the colors are going to be, but every course that is above this dark green, so blue, orange, the paler green, and the yellow, that's an advanced math course. So that's about 54% of students in their senior year for this particular cohort were taking an advanced math in their senior year. But the other thing I should mention is that students can take more than one math course, so this isn't really being able to capture that, but we're seeing that a little over half of students are taking this advanced math, which may reflect their ability to access these courses or choice to enroll. Another thing we want to look at then is who exactly is taking these math courses by demographic group. So here we have race, ethnicity, socioeconomic disadvantage indicator. So the colors here represent, again, what for the previous figure. So red is students that didn't take math, and we do see variation here. And the similar colors for advanced math. For example, we're seeing that Asian American Pacific Islander students, for the most part, they're taking more math both overall and advanced math than any other student group. And another thing to note is that while these differences could potentially be small, for example, we see between Black and Latinx students, there's a 2% difference, or Latinx and white students, there's a 5% difference. While this percentage is small itself, this is representative of a large number of students. So just to keep these numbers in mind. Our data is able to kind of cover all of the census of students in California. We're looking specifically at traditional public schools. So this is really capturing what we're seeing across California. Oops. Okay. Okay, and I'm gonna turn things over to Michal. This may be the one aspect of our work that I haven't really touched a little bit, and I'm gonna take advantage of the fact she's here.
Yeah, Alex has done almost every piece but to dual enrollment, so I'm gonna take this one over. So again, as I mentioned, our project was able to leverage the relationships across the segments to actually, California always had a bad rep for low dual enrollment participation because we really just didn't have that data on it. And what we did was we matched the census of California high school students to the community college system to capture how many students had been enrolled in dual enrollment. Just the quick thing, why do we care about dual enrollment? Dual enrollment has really important benefits for students in two specific ways. One, it gives them early exposure to college, to actually accumulate college courses, but more importantly, it gives them college knowledge information, gives them access to college taking courses while they're still in high school, to give them insight about what it's like to be, a college student. So we think both the sort of actual academic rigor of those courses, along with the knowledge and information, are key mechanism by which dual enrollment leads to stronger post-secondary outcomes. So we match these cohorts, and we learned that, first of all, dual enrollment is increasing across the state for all groups. And so you see this across all students, although you also note, so 18% of high school graduates of 2019 have participated in dual enrollment at some point during high school. We also learned that those equity gaps that we see by race exist for dual enrollment, much like they exist for some of our other metrics, and so that's really important. And then again, we've continued this, I'll show some other slides, but also we're continuing to track these cohorts. More importantly, we're also given insight into sort of when dual enrollment happens. We're also trying to understand, this is cross-sectional for the most recent year. We're also trying to understand when students take dual enrollment, and increasingly we see earlier grades of dual enrollment participation, partly because of CCAP and AB 288 and legislation that has made those partnerships more possible between high school districts and community colleges and community college districts. And so you'll see in 21-22, 5% of ninth graders across public school students across the state were enrolled in dual enrollment, and 7.4% of 10th graders. Thank you. I think that's all I'm going to show. There's a lot we have. This is not out yet, and so stay tuned for more stuff coming out of PACE on dual enrollment. Other types of college participation is AP. So that's back to you, Alex.
Yep. So another college credit course I'm going to talk about is AP exams, or AP courses. So here we're using AP exam participation as an imperfect proxy for course participation, just because of we don't have that data explicitly. So here we're looking at the percentage of students that took at least one AP exam, and we're using a pooled data from 2016 to 2019 to explore this both overall and within demographic groups, specifically race, ethnicity. So we're seeing overall, in 2019 at least, about 42% of all students took at least one AP exam. And this also varies, as we've seen in the other areas, by demographic group. We see Asian and Filipino students are more likely to be taking at least one exam, both over time. But we do see slight increases, and we also, again, see a slight increase in AP exam participation over time. Oh, sorry. AP exam participation over time. So while in 2016, it was about 37 point something percent, 37.8, I believe. In 2019, it's about 42. So we are seeing a slight increase, but we again see variation. Specifically with Black students, while we do see it's increasing, you also notice that Black students' participation in AP exams has been at the lower end for the past 4 years.
I just want to say, we do see much higher participation in the courses, not just the exam, but we're showing exam because that's what it takes to get the college credit, to actually get through the exam. Keep going.
Yeah, thanks. So another thing that we wanted to just show some data about was CTE pathways. So we have a new report that just came out talking about CTE participation, pathway completion. So CTE just is a series of courses students can take while they're in high school to help gain certification in a specific industry sector. For example, agriculture or fashion design. So here we're looking at over time, and for the past few cohorts, about 20% of high school graduates complete a CTE pathway, and this has kind of been varied over the past few years. But if we look a little bit more closely at who's completing these pathways, again, we do see some variation. Filipino American students, 21%, whereas compared to Black or Native American students, about 15 or 17%. While there isn't very much variation here, we do see a lot more variation in the specific industry sectors students are taking. So for example, Black students may be underrepresented in agriculture, whereas another group, I believe it was Asian Americans, are more represented in health and medicine, which is another industry sector students can take. And there's a lot more nuance in these pathway completions and industry sectors in this new report. And if time is gonna allow, I'm gonna assume it is. Okay. I just want to talk about a forthcoming report we have coming out where we were able to survey students from the graduating class of 2023 and to learn about their college plans, but also their college concerns and excitements, just to kind of get the pulse of, how students in this most recent year that, were a little bit different. It was right when the FAFSA was mandated. It was right 2 years in school compared to 2 years out of school doing remote work in the pandemic. So this is kind of a unique group, just to learn what they're thinking about college, what their plans were. So one of the things I wanted to talk about was their concerns about college. So these can include everything from what you might expect, finances, being academically prepared, but a lot of students were also concerned about finding community or having adequate support for their mental and emotional mental health needs, living away from home, as well as balancing family obligations. So it might be a little challenging to read, but at the top, it's being able to afford college tuition. The second one is being able to afford living expenses. So this is rent, food, transportation. And the third is performing well academically. So these top three are pretty indicative of some of the things these state investments are really trying to tackle, with FAFSA mandates, increasing financial aid, supporting students with an increasing amount of college preparatory coursework. But what I'm going to show in a second is some quotes from students, and we'll see that students are still worried about some of these things. So this student is worried about their financial challenges. They're thinking about food, working, managing their time and money. So it's worrying about multiple things at once. And I should note that students were able to select more than one thing. This student's particularly worried about their academics. They don't believe they're prepared to pass college level classes, and they don't think the rest of their class is prepared as well. And this student was really focusing on how to balance family and studying, talking about being the primary caretaker for their nephew, having to help with childcare, help her mom with her job, go to Mexico to support her uncle. So for these students, there's a lot more than just one thing. It's gonna take a package of investments, as we know. But I didn't want to end on everything students were concerned about or worried. A lot of students in the same survey expressed how excited they were to start a new life as an independent person, learn and meet new people, interact with new people with other perspectives, that kind of thing. So this person was excited to better understand and establish their own work ethic and make the most of their college experience. So wanted to just talk about how these are things that were, as this is the pulse of where students are in terms of academic preparation, but also what students are thinking about as they're making this transition into college. And now I'm gonna turn things over to Mark, who's gonna talk more about what's going on at the school level.
Okay, so I'm going to cover the third leg of this presentation, and I don't have all this compelling data, so I apologize. This is where the presentation digresses just a little bit. But we're going to talk about just some different initiatives we've had over the past 5-7 years in Val Verde. One of them is ethnic studies. We made ethnic studies a graduation requirement back in 2017, I believe, no, 19. And we've already had a graduating class who's met and fulfilled that requirement. But I know there's a lot of controversy in regards to ethnic studies out there, and some districts are against it and this and that. But when you actually go into these classrooms and see what's happening and listen to the kids, you know, I would walk into the classrooms and they were saying, it's about time you did this. We're actually seeing less fights. We're seeing more academic performance from our kids being recorded. They're doing better in school. They're feeling more connected to school. A lot of this conference, we're hearing about how chronic absenteeism is rocking all of us, and it's true. Even in Val Verde, we're getting hit by that. But one thing I think that stands out in regards to our program, and that is whatever and whomever takes these classes, we have a spirit of inclusivity. Everyone is valued and everyone's background is valued. And as a result, there is no segregation or division of people, but actually people grow closer together. So I'm really proud of just the work. And this happened because one of our board members really pushed it. And so, you know, it happened quicker than I thought. You know, I talked to one of our board members, let me smooth it over a little bit. Okay. And next thing you know, it gets put on an action item on the agenda, it's passed, and it blew up. And it's probably better it blew up than it didn't. And I'm going to tell you why. I walked into this room where all the social studies teachers were. And usually when I walk in, I have my tie, and everyone kind of like, okay, there's a cabinet member. I did not even faze these guys because they were so entrenched in a conversation that I was nothing. And I have never seen such a conversation take place where they were calling each other out. This is part of our standards. If this is part of our standards, what have you been doing all this time? And, well, I'm not comfortable teaching it. I'm sorry, if you're not comfortable, you should be. It was on. It was no holds barred. And it was probably one of the best conversations I've ever seen. And so, yeah, but through this also, I'm very proud that we created a partnership and a pathway for teachers in Riverside County to get ethnic studies certification underneath their belt so that they do feel more comfortable and they are getting the professional development. So we're working with UC Riverside and created a pipeline, and now this program is being looked at up and down the state of California. One of the other things you're hearing about is FAFSA completion. In 2017, Val Verde also made FAFSA completion a graduation requirement. And all of what you're hearing about in the state right now of all these requirements originated in Val Verde. So I apologize if it's caused you more work. But the reality is if we look at just the research from our friends from EdTrust, you know, we know that 80% of the kids who do not go to college is because of financial reasons. We know kids who do fill out the FAFSA are 120% more to persist. We know that at least 8 years ago, there was $500 million left on the table of unclaimed financial, Cal Grants. For every dollar that a student gets a Cal Grant, our state eventually sees a $4.50 return on the investment. So there's a lot of reasons. And for me, I was just looking at the economic downturn, and I remember hearing the stat like 15 years ago that we have enough student loan debt to cause another recession on top of the one that we're already in. And so I said, what are we going to do about that? But when I talk to administrators up and down the state about the importance of FAFSA, one of the things that keeps them from embracing it is they're afraid of it causing more work for the counselors. And when we did this in Verde, I just said, hey, we're going to create a system where it's not just on counselors. And as a result, you can kind of see all the different people involved in what they do and how it pushes. If it's a system, it's more likely to help promote equity and higher ed attainment. And so when I show them that, it starts, their wheels starts moving because in the absence of this graph or this table, people didn't believe it. And it's like, hey, so administrators, I remember one time I did a presentation for one district and they had their lawyer there with them. Is everything this guy's doing legal? Yes, it's legal. Oh, is this a violation of FERPA? No, Arnie Duncan in 2015 wrote this letter to all state agencies because at one point giving people feedback on who completed and who didn't was considered a violation of FERPA. So Arnie Duncan then said, this is not a violation of FERPA. I waited 2 weeks, I called CSAC, I know you got the letter. Let's do it. And so I worked at the county office then and we created a county initiative which has now gone to the state level. So this is a picture, it's probably not the best picture, but one of the things I do is I gather all the managers in the district with a list of kids that counselors are struggling with who haven't completed, and we make a phone call on behalf of that counselor. The first year we did this, we made 750 calls. The second year, there was 450. Year 3, we didn't have to make any calls. Why is that? It became part of the culture. So when I was at the county, I was studying school systems up and down, all around. And we looked at Chicago, and Chicago said, you want to go to the prom? Got to fill out the FAFSA. We don't make that a requirement there, but we do have systems in place. Now you're going to say, what happened to your grad rate when you did this? It didn't negatively impact the grad rate. Not one. And then people are like, well, how many calls did you got? Year 1, I got 1 call. 1 call. Okay. And one of the things I said was, hey, we are going to be very sensitive to parents' concerns. And if we do the sales pitch and they don't like it, then have them sign the opt-out form and they'll be on their way. We've had very little opt-outs. The very first year we did this, we had just, I think, right around 1,500 kids. We had 11 opt-outs district-wide. Second year, we had 10. And we also celebrate what we want to see more. So you see Cashella at Rancho, FAFSA Friday at Citrus, and Orange Vista has Mardi Gras. CTE, we're really pushing more CTE, and we have a continuum of what we're doing. So we're not just talking the high school, but we have a continuum of things that we're putting in place, starting in kindergarten. And this is a presentation in itself. But I just want to show you, each of our elementary schools has a STEAM lab. We want to get them interested in math and science and all these different things, art as well. And so they get their hands on things at a very early age. Every elementary has a STEAM lab, and then this past year we have a STEAM teacher who's there, who actually helps lessons and helps the regular teacher. They bring their kids off, they drop them off, and they have an expert. I used to teach science, and one of the things I heard was, elementary teachers are supposed to be experts in everything, 5, 6 different subject areas. And, as a result, they have limited experience, and so we try to bridge that gap. And here's just some of the things the kids are working on. And then one of the things we put in place, I'm really proud of this, is that we have gardens at all of our schools. If you ask me, I think we're kind of losing our way in education. It's more than just test scores, folks. I get so burned out on that. And this is coming from myself, who was in the works of a Broad Prize back-to-back years. One year, Sacramento called, said, you're doing the best job of decreasing the achievement gap with African Americans. You're number 3 with Hispanics. But there's more to life than test scores. I don't even know where this is going to go with the advent of artificial intelligence. So we have to really wake up and say, where's education going? And not get so caught up in things. But when I look at these gardens, I think, I had a little plastic cup with a bean plant in it. That was my experience. But these kids are getting amazing experiences with the gardens that are being put in. We have an animaker space at one of our elementaries. These kids program these robots how to move. It's like the figures at Chuck E. Cheese that you see. Well, they learn how to program them at a very early age. CAD, 3D, middle school labs. We have a drone lab. We have an agricultural complex at one of our schools where they do aquaponics, and they're on the verge of raising lettuce, 400 heads of lettuce every week, which will be used by the cafeteria. More pictures of our gardens. And then we actually have a vineyard. We have a vineyard, 980 vines. We ended a partnership with Dofo Winery in Temecula, which is going to be the next Napa, and it's a $5 billion industry out there. Well, why don't we tap into that? So when you're looking at CTE, look at the employment, what is the future, what's it going to bring, tap into it, look into your community college, create those pathways. We have 52 pathways in my district. It's unheard of. But with that, be careful, because it creates singletons. So you got to have this balance. And you don't want to drive yourself bankrupt either with such low class sizes. So just more some on the pathways. So we want to create that culture of college going. In our district, we don't say, are you CTE or are you college bound? What do you mean? They're all college bound. So you could see where we were with graduation rate. We unfortunately went down during the pandemic like everyone, and we're rebounding back. A through G completion, we created an A through G audit that has now gone statewide, where we analyze transcripts and we identify the obstacles, the barriers that get in the way of access. In Riverside County, you don't hear about access barriers anymore, but you hear more about success barriers. How many kids are actually passing the classes? And that one's a harder journey. And so CTE completion rate, you could see what's happening with CTE in our district. A through G and CTE completion. Most of our classes have been UC Doorways approved. So we really minimize, if at all, if you're going to go through our schools, you're likely to be A through G compliant. And all of the master schedules are student-centered. And what I learned through being a high school principal and now working at a district and former county office, there's something called rollover, the rollover feature in the master schedule. Are any of you familiar with that? Is that master schedule? Well, I have a saying in my district, don't let the rollover feature cause you to roll over in your grave. And what do I mean by that? I mean that if you really know what your kids need, your master schedule should look a little different every year. But if we just roll over and put everything in place that we've always have done, be careful, because what that can create is generational gaps. Because if you hire based off of your needs and you don't really need what you think you need, now you have teachers who are tenured, and you got to keep them employed. And so this is just it. I always say circumstances may cause interruptions and delays, but never lose sight of what your goal is. And people who say it cannot be done should not interrupt those who are doing it. And so I'm going to turn it over.
All right, good afternoon, everybody. So good to see folks here. First of all, just want to thank Michal and Alexandria for the, sort of grounding us in the data. We know that we continue to struggle with inequitable outcomes in A through G, in math completion, and dual enrollment, and AP, exam taking. And Mark, I think your words speak, and the work that you're doing in Verde really speak to how important it is for folks to have a shared vision for students, really center students, and create systems and structures to support more coherence in how we go about implementing all these different programs and initiatives. And so I think we have this opportunity, right? We have so much money right now that could potentially transform the way young people experience high school, but we got to do things differently. And as Michal alluded to earlier, we have a ton of investments right now, some that are very specific to high schools, like pathways and dual enrollment, and some that focus more broadly on providing better supports and services so that all students can thrive. And so, we have $4.1 billion for community schools. We have $4.7 billion for the Children and Youth Behavioral Initiative, $500 million for Golden State Pathways, $200 million for career and college access pathways, and for middle and early college programs. And these investments really build on over 20 decades of state and philanthropic investments in high schools that have involved reimagining the structure of high schools, the way teaching and learning is delivered, and attending to the academic health and well-being of students. Our team at First recently conducted a landscape scan, thanks to the Stewart Foundation. Thank you, Susie. And we kind of looked at the work over the last 20 years, and what really stands out, and I think all of you probably, know this, is just the siloed and fragmented nature of these efforts. There are so many programs, so many initiatives, so many policies with varying and often competing goals, different data collection, reporting requirements, different grant applications. We've had small high schools, small learning communities, early college, middle college, dual enrollment, pathways, academies, A through G for all, link learning, deeper learning, MTSS, PBIS, community schools. That's the world our teachers and students live in, right? And so equitable and coherent implementation of these programs has always been a challenge for us here across the country. And so this is a graphic that I think exemplifies, the state of education in California and across the country. And what we see is really disconnected communication, bureaucratic obstacles that often result in isolated policies and programs, and they often fail. They're not successful. And we call this problem fragmentation. So this is my offering to you. We call this fragmentation. It really holds us back from addressing inequity and creating better outcomes for students. And the current state of fragmentation and chaos is a result of competing directives, mandates, policies, funding streams within and across organizations that make up our education system. And so when those of us who are responsible for designing and implementing policy fail to consider the implications of independently developed policies and programs, at the end of the day, teachers and principals, students and families are kind of left to make sense of all of this that's happening up there and to connect the dots. And so they're just, you think about the veteran teachers who are just like, I'm just going to wait y'all out because this will probably pass too, right? Because I've seen all these things come and go. And I actually just did a presentation on coherence to 30 leaders from various state education agencies from across the country, and I asked them to provide examples of fragmentation that they've experienced in their own work at the SEA level. And they talked about, one, numerous categorical grants coming from the legislator, each with its own grant application and separate criteria and requirements. Another person said, we have common state education agency goals, but various offices are taking different approaches to realizing those goals. We are fragmented, so like another challenge being an area of fragmentation is on the supports provided to educators. So an example being professional learning from different offices and departments from an agency. Another issue is aligning language and messaging across the agency on a number of issues, or sharing the responsibility for content standards development with CTE, but with different requirements and approaches. And then finally, another person said we have inconsistent definitions of key terms, and I'm going to give you one. When we talk about high school transformation, we often talk about pathways. I bet if I asked you to write down your definition of pathways, we'd probably come up with over 20 definitions of pathways here, right? Yet we keep saying we're going to be investing in pathways. What does that mean? I think it means a different thing for different people in here, depending on what approach you're taking and what you think pathways are for. So when you think about fragmentation in the context of high school transformation, that can look like a district's academic office being siloed from the college and career readiness office, being siloed from the folks who are implementing community schools. Some of you know I led a multi-year evaluation of linked learning, and one of the things we kept hearing from teachers when we were doing that evaluation, this was about 10 years ago, they would say that they would feel like they were being pulled in different directions when it came to professional development because at the time we were also implementing the Common Core state standards, and they would say, I'm over here having to do PD on Common Core state standards, and over there the College of Career Readiness office is telling me I need to do PD on linked learning. And in my mind, I'm thinking, well, why aren't you all talking together? Because the content standards are going to be delivered in the pathway courses through projects and through curriculum and reading. So why aren't you embedding your PD for Common Core into your PD for linked learning? But they weren't doing it. They were talking. There were different departments, and teachers are trying to navigate, well, I'm being told I got to go to this PD here and that PD there. That's super confusing, and that's fragmentation, right? And so I think this is a moment to do things really differently. It's a very pretty picture. It's very cleaned up. It's a vision. It's going to take, if we had achieved this, none of us would be here, right? So this is the vision. So I'm going to offer a way to think about coherence that really consciously addresses fragmentation and really is about restoring a sense of shared purpose and is the reason so many of us are here today to create a better learning experience for our young people. And so it's not alignment, all right? It's not just about being in alignment. It's about more effectively collaborating, communicating, focusing on doing fewer things better, cultivating trusting relationships among stakeholders, addressing problems and solutions with design thinking methods, and intentionally building equity into processes and decisions. And so so I think some of you who were here earlier saw Dr. Cheatham, or on the video, shared one kind of coherence framework. This is another one, and I know we can be overwhelmed with frameworks in education, but I'm going to offer you another one. So this is a framework that Ed first created with the Council of Chief State School Officers several years ago. And the Coherence Lab is really designed to support state and district leaders to learn about and build skills in coherence so that we can really work more coherently both within state agencies and between state agencies and districts and within districts. And the tools and resources that we've developed are really designed to help leaders move from systems and structures that are fragmented to ones that are more coherent. And so this framework we've developed is research-based, and we've really come up with three main drivers of fragmentation. One is the lack of capacity and incentives to collaborate across silos. Another is inefficient and inequitable stakeholder engagement. And a third is a failure to embrace how adults learn and change. There's a whole body of literature, right, about adult learning and change management that is integrated into this framework. And so we really address these three root causes and kind of going around, it's all grounded in equitable ways of thinking and working. You start with building focus and coordinate, actually you start with developing trusting relationships, and then building focus and coordination, and then changing behaviors at scale. So when you're trying to build a more coherent system, you start by cultivating trusting relationships between different entities. And our system isn't really designed around trust, right? It's just not. I mean, the state doesn't trust districts, districts don't trust schools, and so we end up with a myriad of programs and initiatives that have different data collection and reporting requirements, different goals and visions. And so you got to start with cultivating trusting relationships, and I would love to hear from Mark what kind of work you all have done to create those types of relationships at the district and school levels. But when we engage and center people first, that can lead to more collaboration and less siloing, so we can prioritize and do a few things better. Because again, we're trying to do too much, right? How can we narrow our focus around a shared vision? And so in the work of high school transformation, this would mean really de-siloing across CTE, dual enrollment, community schools, your academic and instruction folks, your talent and HR folks, and really building trust and collaboration. And just to sort of wrap things up, I would say so through this landscape analysis that we conducted, if we were to sort of approach this, the work of high school transformation differently, we would start by unifying stakeholders, whether at the district level or from the state to the district level, around a shared vision. What is our vision for our young people around college and career readiness? And then really starting to align the initiatives with that shared vision, bridging the data divide and creating more coherent data systems. And again, super excited for the cradle to career data system and the opportunity for both better data and less fragmented data. And then really start building the capacity of teachers and leaders and administrators to engage in more coherent ways of working. And I do think a bright spot for coherence is potentially the master plan for career education that we're working on. That could be an opportunity to really bring things together in a more coherent way. And so I think there's an opportunity, and some momentum right now that we could really begin to develop a shared cohesive vision that really affirms the purpose of high school and the purpose of high school in supporting democratic and healthy communities. And so that's my offering to all of you, and look forward to the conversation during the table talk, and happy to answer any questions you have.
One of the three themes today at this conference is about data. So I thought we would start there. We have a lot of questions here about data. And we have a lot of questions for Mark at Verde, but I'm going to start with a couple of easy questions about data that I think Michal and Alex can answer quickly, and then we can spend some time talking to Mark about what's happening in Verde. So first, let's talk dual enrollment, Michal. Does the 18% dual enrollment rate include articulated high school courses?
Yeah, thanks. Okay, so yes, it does. And what I wanted to say, which you didn't see on the figure, is that when we look, we're able to back out more formal dual enrollment. So
Yeah.
I think it's okay. I also taught middle school. You can hear me, right? Oh, for you, sorry. Yes, for those of you watching at home. So, okay. Sorry. So what we know is that for years people, I mean, I did many, many moons ago, take a class at a community college while they're in high school, but these were often sort of random acts of dual enrollment, as we call them, and they were very unequal, who had access to them, who had knowledge about them. And so what we do know is that those inequalities by race that I showed you on dual enrollment are much smaller when we look at formal dual enrollment. CCAP, early college, high school, middle college, high school, we can back those out in our data. So when they are formal in quotes, again, they all look a little bit different. Those inequalities are much reduced. And importantly, the increasing rate of dual enrollment participation, particularly for students of color, are from those formal programs. And so from that, we sort of say CCAP is working, and the alignment, the increased alignment for dual enrollment participation is clearly reducing inequality.
Can I add to that? Please. I know I'm not a panelist, but I'm doing a lot of work on dual enrollment right now, and we have a new report that'll be released by PACE and Wheelhouse within 2 or 3 weeks, I'm guessing. And one of the things we did take a look at that Michal and Alex shared was the 9th through 12th grade rates, right, within a given year, and those rates. And what we do see also is a lot more equitable participation rates in 9th grade, where we think dual enrollment opportunities are more formalized within high schools. And so I think that's a promising indicator of what the potential of dual enrollment is for equity. So, all right, does that answer your question, Maureen? All right. Okay, sticking with some quick data questions, I think, and then we'll move to district implementation. Michal or Alex, talk about linking the 12th grade math course taking data with post-secondary data.
Alex is like, you take it. So we have some work in progress to look lots of conjecture around what math courses you need to really be successful in college and in particular pathways, and we're working on that now. I will say, thanks to this great partnership with CD, now CD releases post-secondary enrollment data, so we do have, for the Census of California, post-secondary enrollment, although I think NSC has benefited from everybody doing this separately for years, but we can sort of track everyone. It's a much harder question. I think just there's this larger question embedded in this one, which is how do students fare once they get in college? And I would just say, the evidence from the last half century or so is that we know a lot more about how to get kids into college than how to keep them there. It's just like a lot less known about, and Dr. Howard mentioned some, and we see this across, the completion rates are not where they should be. They're lagging way behind the participation rates, and they're extremely unequal. And so we have a long way to go in better understanding how to support students once they get to college, and that's not a quick data question, so I'm gonna stop.
That's enough. That's teasery. Okay, and then finally, I think, Alex, you can tackle this one. Who is researching the new K-16 collaborative implementation grants?
Let me make sure.
You talk about ours, and then we can talk about the others.
So one of our
You gotta move to the mic.
partnerships is we're actually going to be working with UC Davis on their portion of the K-16 collaborative grant. So we're going to be able to see how the UC's role as a state partner is working with that, and that's going to enable us to really learn a little bit more about how this new intersegmental partnership that's, it's one portion that's being spread across the state is really working out, and how everyone's working together. Sherry, I don't know if you want to add anything else.
Alex is going to lead the work for UC Davis in evaluating their role in 3 partnerships. UC Davis is the northernmost UC, and therefore is in 3 regional partnerships. But that would be the Sacramento region, North State Together, and Redwood Coast. But there's many other partnerships, K-16 partnerships across the state. And so I think every partnership is handling research and evaluation differently. I don't know, Kelsey, Lupita, do you have any, Wested, anybody have any more information on that? Anybody in the room? More information on that? So every partnership is doing its own, but we'll be handling UC Davis. Okay, sticking with the data theme, but moving to district level data. Several here for you, Mark. One is about data systems that you use to drive your FAFSA and A to G initiatives.
With FAFSA, we used the data that you get from CSAC. CSAC gives out data to school districts through web grants, and you get that through the upload of the Cal Grant GPA sophomore year. So what we did is we took those reports, and then I had my IT department, download them, customize them, send them to the sites, and they would get that every week, student by student, who completed, who didn't. And that helped us until it got to the point where the counselors just knew how to do it all on their own, and they don't need any of our help. Matter of fact, I just stay out of the way now, because these counselors, they're just amazing. And they do the work, they believe what they're doing makes a difference. And so we're real happy just with what we've seen with data on that. I'm sorry, there's 2 parts to that question.
FAFSA and A to G. A
through G. I believe Ed Trust also had a author write a book, and this author was a former superintendent of San Jose, and she had this thing called A through G for All, and it was a book called Diploma Matters, and Linda Murray was the superintendent. I read the book. I was a high school principal then, and I'm like, I don't know how I'm going to do this. I'm going to write this in my goals, and we're going to go after this. And you could evaluate me on this. And so a buddy of mine, I worked with him, and we learned how to actually do a transcript audit analysis on Google. And we started working with it. And at that point, I remember I asked my assistant principals in charge of the master schedule, I said, hey, what do I need to hire this year? And they said, oh, you need to hire math teachers. Before we did this transcript, in my mind, I thought it was going to be chemistry and math. Well, it turns out when you go through each transcript painstakingly and see what kids need, where the bottlenecks are, in our school, it was not math or chemistry, it was world languages. Kids did not have access to Spanish, and they were failing Spanish too. And so we ended up giving that data to the department because they never seen data like this. They immediately changed their grading scales. I hired 2 more Spanish teachers. World languages was no longer an issue for A through G. But if I would have hired without asking questions, it'd still be going on today. So it was that data. And it was the first time where administrators and counselors got together and learned all of the A through G validation rules. What are all the ins and outs of A through G and how it works? At the end of the day, there was capacity built. Now we just looked at the reports, analyzed where the bottlenecks were. Was it an access issue? Was it a success issue? And there we go from there. Now, the student information systems, they'll say like, yeah, we could do the same thing. They're about 90% accurate. And so they're getting better, but this system that was created just really helped. And all of Riverside County does it now. We've created a system in San Diego County to emulate it. I've went to other counties and done actual trainings on this, and that has made all the world of difference. And 10 years ago, the relationships between counselors and administrators weren't the best. And it's because they didn't really realize what each of them were doing. And I would argue the expertise needed to do the job of counselor is more technical than that of an administrator. But these are just lessons learned over time. But I was making the same mistakes as any other high school principal prior to the work that I did at our county office.
Thank you. Before you touched on a topic about relationships, which I want to come back to because I have several questions on that. But before we do, I wanted to ask Roneeta if you had anything to add in your work with districts about examples of where data plays a really important role in bringing coherence to programming.
That's a great question. I mean, I haven't worked as closely with districts around data, but I think my sense is probably folks are in different departments are looking at different bits of data, and so aren't looking at things, and I think maybe what you all are doing, like with your financial aid data. I think Mark's example is such a great one, like around, they have this vision of everyone completing, their FAFSA. Well, don't leave it just in the hands of the councils. Let's create a system and a structure where you have different folks coming in and really helping to figure out what that looks like. And I think that's a really great example of coherence around data and using that to achieve a shared vision. So that's what I would say.
Great, okay. And one last data question, the use of National Student Clearinghouse data. Mark, are you using that in your district to monitor college-going rates?
Yeah, when I got to Riverside County Office of Ed, we had access to National Student Clearinghouse, but no one was using it because no one knew what it was about. So when we started our counseling network, I started introducing it, and we have worked intimately with National Student Clearinghouse, helping to improve their product, yeah, so I can't wait to November and April when those reports come out 2 times a year, and we're taking a look at them, and just sharing the information with everyone and educating our board as those reports come out. What are we seeing? What is actually happening? It's very powerful. And if you take it a step or two further from that, just with a few clicks, you can get it down to the student level. And that is like, whoa. So what we did at Riverside is we ended up getting data sharing agreements across all districts and started answering questions that had never been asked. How many kids are actually going to college who are in the AVID program? How many kids are actually enrolling if they have 1 AP class versus 2 AP? And it just went from there.
Michal, did you have anything you want to add about National Student Clearinghouse data and district use?
It has continued to improve in terms of their ability to do matches. It's not perfect, but it is good. And that the state now does it overall. So, and I know that it's going to be a piece of cradle to career. So, I just think it's to me, beyond A to G, any of these metrics is sort of where students end up should be like one of those, aspects. But no, that's.
Okay, great. So now I'm going to allow Roneeta to ask her question of Mark again, if she remembers what it is.
Yeah, so when I talked about the coherence framework, we talked, I mentioned that, there's those 3 elements, and the first one was around cultivating trusting relationships. And then by centering people and those relationships, you could start to break down silos and really start to coordinate and collaborate more effectively. And so I was curious what kind of work you've done around building relationships within your district and between the district and schools.
I think one of the key things is just making time to get out there and visit people. So we go through classrooms regularly in our district, kind of get a feel of what's actually happening, what's the saturation point of the professional development we're offering, what is some of the feedback that they have for us. And when you're out there, you hear all kinds of other stuff that you weren't intending to hear, but it gives you an overall feel. We bring our principals in every month, and as a cabinet, we meet with them. And they'll always ask, what do you want me to bring? Yourself. I don't need you to bring anything. We're going to sit down. We're going to have a talk. Chances are you're probably going to get nothing from it, but I'm going to get a bunch from it. So just come on in. Let's talk. I want to hear more about your kids, your family, but also I want to hear, how's it going with our new mental health therapists? How's this happening? And through all of these things, we get a pulse of what's happening, what's not happening, what are they saying, what are they not saying, and then just our intuition of what do we need to do the next steps. And before we end the meeting, we always ask them, okay, is there anything else we can do to further support you? And they're not bashful anymore. They'll ask. And it really helps just for us to gauge what can we do to act as a system.
Great. Thank you. Let's see. So this is for both Mark and Roneeta, I think, about conditions. So the question is just, what are the conditions in place to successfully implement changes and bring coherence? You shared some. You want to elaborate on anything?
I mean, so when I have actually delivered the curriculum for the Coherence Lab, we actually start with the problem of practice. Like, what is your problem of practice around coherence? So you got it, like, what is the problem you're trying to solve for? And then really having folks engage in a process of, like, we actually have folks go out and do empathy interviews with the people they've identified as most proximate to the problem of practice, right? So let's not just decide what we think is the problem. Let's actually figure out who's closest to the problem of practice and ask them some questions. Develop a problem statement and then start to develop solutions. So that's how we actually approach the process of, like, engaging folks in a coherence mindset. I mean, I don't know if that answers your question, but that's where we start in our work with district and SEA leaders, is what is your problem of practice and who's most proximate to that problem. And that allows them to center students or teachers or whoever is actually affected by that lack of coherence.
Do you want to add anything about the conditions necessary for success?
Yeah, I think I think the conditions that when I reflect on what has happened, I always go back to systems. So when we first talked about making FAFSA a graduation requirement in the district, I individually went out to every high school and met with each counseling team and met with every social studies team and just said, here's what I'm thinking about doing. Would I be able to get your support? Here's the reasons why. And most of the counselors jumped right on board. I think all the counselors did. And then when I went to the social studies teacher, I got 2 of the high schools on board, but then I went to the 3rd school and they weren't saying very much. And sometimes when people don't say very much, and I'm like, So I thought to myself, who is the real leader on the campus? And it was one of the counselors there, and I said, hey, Robin, I don't think that social studies team bought into what I was saying. I did a horrible sales job on it. But you're mama, and if you say it's good, they'll follow your lead. And she went, they got on board, and there it was. We got them to buy in. And I think you're always kind of surveying. You're measuring. Do I got them? Do I not? And I knew I didn't that day, but I knew who I needed to turn to. We also turned, because 20% of our schools have English learners. We have a organization out there called TODAC, which is an immigration services. They've been in the community 25 years. This is when all the DACA stuff came out, and we came out and said we're a DACA district, and we had some flack about that. Well, one of the things I said is, don't worry about all these guys on the internet or all these blogs. I don't know if they even work, but don't get caught up in all of that. That's enough to trip you up. Stay the course. Take some screenshots, because we're going to use this in future presentations. But if we get tripped up on this, it's on the verge of not happening. And so I think we've taken risks. We made ourselves vulnerable. And when we were going through the pandemic, I think if you think back at that point in time, everyone just wanted the bottom line but couldn't get it, What do you know? What do you don't know? And where are you at? Where are you going? And so we ended up making ourselves vulnerable. Every week for 90 minutes, we had a little town hall, and I was in charge of them. And for 36 weeks, I had to entertain everyone regarding what we knew on COVID, what we didn't know, how we weren't going to have in-person graduations. We were the first out the gate. We were getting beat up, but you know what? We were also gaining and garnering a lot of respect because of that. And as a result, when we had board meetings, we only had 1 or 2 people show up. There were some neighboring districts that had 900 people showing up. But I think that was just it, is that we made ourselves vulnerable. And I hated doing those meetings, because sometimes you didn't have any new information, but I'm going to entertain you guys for 90 minutes. What do? You tell them what you know, tell them what you don't know. There's too many people out there mincing words and being politically correct. let's not do that. Let's just give everyone the bottom line.
So some themes I heard, which keep resonating today. Building relationships, right? And leveraging those relationships. Building consensus, right? Around a shared mission and vision. Open communication channels, transparency. Those are some of the conditions, right, for success. So great. Okay, so we have 2 minutes left, 3 minutes left. So in 30 seconds, or less, the hardest question of the day, but it sets us up nicely for the debate we're going to hear. How much does high school transformation depend on state policy and funding versus local policy and practice? To all four of you.
Well, I'll be the first to tell you that. I don't always think money's the answer. Everything always goes money, money, money. Money can cause problems, you know, and I always feel, okay, I'm going to get kicked out of the room now in education when I say this, but I've seen it over and over and over again where money causes issues. If you do not have a well laid out plan of how that money is going to be spent, be very careful about taking it and taking on all of these responsibilities that could end up wrecking your system.
I'd agree. I mean, I think at the local level, there has to be a shared vision, and the money from the state can help you achieve that vision. That's great. I've heard plenty of places say, I'm not going to go for the community schools dollar or this funding or that funding because it's actually going to mess up what I'm doing, or it's going to create more headaches in terms of reporting and data collection. I'm just not going to do it. So I would really only go after those state dollars if it's helping you achieve the vision that you have in place for your young people. Otherwise, it's just more work than it's worth.
So one of the things that I've been thinking about throughout this whole talk is, in addition to the idea of coherence, this idea of capacity. And when we think about the state investments and whether or not a district's choosing to access this money, I'm also thinking about a district. One of the things the district would be thinking about is their capacity to take on this additional funds and whether or not it works with their current plan, current
Vision.
guide. Sorry. So wait, Sherry, could you repeat the question? Sorry. I don't
Yeah.
wanna
How much
lose
does high school
focus.
transformation depend on state policy and funding versus local policy and practice?
Okay, so long story short, I think while the funding's necessary, it's really what's happening at the local level that's driving all the change that we're going to see. So if the district is taking on the funds, it's the local practices that they're implementing, whether or not they're able to hire teachers, and if this money is going to allow them to extend this hiring of teachers. So I think high school transformation then, in this sense, is just, it's a local issue that that the state funding doesn't necessarily always provide ability to answer.
Michal, final word?
Sure. I don't want the final word, but I will just say I don't disagree that it's never just about the money, but I do think one of the things that we learned from this pandemic and that we heard repeatedly all day is just how much how we were doing business wasn't working for so many students. And so I think a part of the solution has been not just to build coherence, but to sort of think about the much wider set of challenges that so many kids experience and how much we're expecting from schools. And so what I have appreciated about the new state investments is that they take on a bigger piece of what we always knew was there, but we didn't really access. Now, what happens with that and how the extent to which, as Alex said, locally that can be leveraged, not all places look like Verde, but I know where I want to go work, I guess, is challenging. And so, those LCAPs, the community schools, are only as good as the extent to which you can really and work with your communities and with the broader forces. I also will just say, and we were talking about this in our table, that a lot of these things still rely on adults to do right by students. All this diversification of course pathways of whatever they look like really are dependent on kind of adults doing the right thing, advising students about their options. And so when that's the case, we always should be a little bit worried about not perpetuating inequalities that we know happen so frequently. So I think it's an and both, and I think how they work together requires coherence.
All right, and with that, thank you so much for coming. Thank our panelists.